For some people, this may be a topic that is worthy of dismissing, but maybe it isn't. Should you stop relying on autofocus? So, it depends on who you talk to, because for some cases, autofocus might be hugely helpful and worth doing, if it's like good autofocus. But if you ever look at any of these cinema camera rigs, for the most part, at least when it comes to these bigger cinema camera, bigger production things, I don't think that they usually use autofocus on any of this stuff, and some of these cameras don't even have autofocus, I don't believe, especially if you're talking about older cinema cameras. There's some newer cinema cameras that do, but just because they do doesn't mean they even use lenses that can autofocus. So what do? Well, there's this type of job called a focus puller. So this is a guy that is basically on this little screen with this little kind of turn dial or whatever you call it, and he's wirelessly pulling focus on the camera while the other operator or operators or whatever are doing other things, right? So as far as I understand, there's a job just for pulling focus, right? Because he's manually doing it from a wireless transmitter receiver setup thing. And so why do they do it that way when they could, get like a Sony FX3 or something like that, and use like G-Master autofocus lenses? To a degree, it might be because they want a certain look or a certain whatever that a specific cinema lens provides, and that lens doesn't have autofocus options. And also, with manual focus pulling, you have maximum control, for better or worse, over where the focus is, right? Whereas if it's with autofocus, depending on the level of autofocus, like how good it is, how new it is, if you go to some older stuff, like on this Panasonic GH5 right here, the autofocus is not great. If you go to something newer, like a modern Sony camera, as far as I understand, or as far as I've heard from people like Casey from Camera Conspiracies on YouTube, talks about quite well, I believe, of Sony autofocus, like the modern version, the Phase Detect, I think it's called. And then Canon dual pixel autofocus is also pretty good, I believe. And then Panasonic's even upped their game with autofocus in recent camera models, so make sure to consider that depending on which Panasonic camera you're buying and if good autofocus matters or not to you. But yeah, when you got autofocus, right, and if you're doing it manually, you can choose where the focus is. Whereas if it's on automatic, even if it's good, there's, probably, depending on the brand or whatever, or even just chance or whatever, there might be a possibility that the autofocus could choose something that you don't want it to in the moment when you're shooting something. Now, maybe this matters to you, maybe it doesn't, but if you're doing like a film and you want to get it in this take, and let's say something happens during that take that is hard to replicate, or say you're filming some travel video or documentary where it's like you might not be able to get somebody to just do that organic thing again with the same kind of whatever. And so what if the autofocus for some reason misses the shot in the way that you wanted it? Right, these are risks, but at the same time, having autofocus, ideally good autofocus, allows you to have a certain level of a carefree nature, where you could just kind of run and gun and shoot, and it's going to just kind of do what you want it to do, hopefully, and do it well enough, and you don't have to think about it, you don't have to try to multitask and focus on a bunch of different, focus in the sense of your attention on all these different things in addition to pulling focus. It could maybe be a lot depending on what you're doing. And so, if you're wanting to do run and gun, good autofocus is probably quite important. If you're doing more of a controlled sit-down interview documentary thing, maybe manual focus could be something you might be more interested in, or might be less risky or whatever. Especially if you have like a dedicated focus puller, it might be like much more doable. But if I'm losing my train of thought here. There's also the fact of if you have a certain lens that doesn't have autofocus, then you're going to have to pull it manually unless you get a LiDAR autofocus system. So as far as I understand, LiDAR is where it actually has like depth perception based on this little other smaller little eye camera thing that like sends little beams of light to detect depth, I think. I could be wrong in how I'm explaining this, but essentially LiDAR, I think, has like some level of 3D depth perception, and you can have a LiDAR autofocus system that you put onto your camera / lens via the little focus gear thing. So you'd have like the focus gear on your lens focus ring. Let me show you. I don't actually have focus gears on this lens right now, but it would be like you would put focus gears on the lens, which would look like little teeth, and then you'd have like a little kind of like a gear system that would be on this little wireless receiver or whatever it is, whether it's wired or not, and it would just kind of turn the lens and pull focus based on like the LiDAR data that it's getting and stuff like that. But at the same time, there might be some limitations to when it works well and not so well in the technology in terms of it being used in this way, or products that are coming out right now, I think is a bit more recent in terms of the mainstreaming of it, I think. I could be wrong. And also that's an extra bit of gear that you have to get. You have to rig out your camera for it. There's factors. There is at least 1 or 2 cameras, I think, that can work with the LiDAR unit by plugging it in via USB-C to the camera, and then you just have a little module on top, and it'll actually electronically in the camera body pull the focus through the actual lens focusing mechanics. Then you don't need the focus gear. As far as I understand, I think this is something that the GH6 could do. I could be wrong, but there's options and different little nifty things, but you have to consider the price as well as like the extra gear, and how does that interfere with the rig that you have, or would you have to modify? Like, these are factors. And also like depending on if you want to do that or not, if you're going to take a different older lens or a cinema lens that doesn't have electronics in it to autofocus, or does that electronics even work with your camera, things like that, or like, I could be wrong about some of the stuff I'm saying, but there's factors involved, so it might be kind of a time and place or a specific use case on whether you choose to do the autofocus route or the manual focus route. So keep that in mind. Anyway, if you got some questions, I got a Skool Community, link in description. If you click that, I think it brings you to my About page where you could sign up. I'm currently running a 7-day free trial. If you got questions, hop in the Skool Community, ask the questions. Alright, thanks for watching. Have a good day.